So our reading was from 1 Kings and chapter 18. And in that context, we've got Elijah who is prophesying during a really dark time in Israel's history. Ahab was the king. He is one of the most wicked kings that they had throughout their entire history. 1 Kings 16, verse 30 says that he did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all who were before him. So you know that everybody before him wasn't as bad. That doesn't mean they were good, but the scriptures specifically say he did more evil than everybody who was before him. What we find if we were to take a snapshot of the nation at that point is the political leadership is corrupt, the spiritual leadership is spineless, and the populace as a whole are lukewarm at best, perhaps apathetic and detached are better descriptions for how they were at that time. They had left God behind and had come over to worship the Baals. And in fact, in the reading that was given to us, we heard that the prophets of Baal and the prophets of Asherah have seats at the table of Jezebel, who is the queen of Israel. And so it is just an awful time in their history. It was a time of compromise. Ahab married Jezebel, who is a pagan princess, in order to create a political alliance, but it didn't do any good for the spiritual well-being of the people. The worship of Baal at this point had become a state-sponsored idolatry. And I say that because in the text, what we find is that Ahab had built a new temple and a new altar for Baal in Samaria. Not for the Lord, but for Baal. Now, there'd be a problem if you built one for the Lord as well. That temple's down south in Jerusalem. But they are bought in on this Baal worship that is going on. There is no moral leadership among the leaders of the nation. They are all corrupt. And while some will still acknowledge Jehovah at this point, they persecute his prophets. And so, for the spiritual benefit of the nation, Elijah in chapter 17 proclaimed that there would be no rain, not even dew on the land, for a substantial period of time. Understand, those are not just the words of an angry traditionalist prophet. Elijah is speaking on behalf of Jehovah. And we know that because immediately upon him speaking the words, a 3.5-year period of drought started. There was no rain and there was no dew on the land for the next 3.5 years. And then in the introduction to chapter 18, Elijah is now commanded to go back. And so he has been away from the land for a time. He's commanded to go back, and his mission is to bring the people back to the Lord. The purpose of the drought was to quell their penchant for compromise and get them back right with God. And so God sustained Elijah in those 3.5 years or so. First at the brook Cherith, with ravens bringing him food, and the brook eventually dried up, so he exited the land. He spent some time with the widow of Zarephath. But God brings him back. And the first several verses in chapter 18 reveal how dire things had become in Israel. For time's sake, we're not going to read through or discuss everything in the opening. I want us to get to the latter part of chapter 18 in the bulk of our lesson today. But just a few details from the opening verses of chapter 18. Verse 2, it's described as a severe famine in Samaria. Again, there is no water coming out of the skies at all. There is no dew that would happen every morning. None of that is there. And so a severe famine because of the drought that has taken place. Verse 4, the spiritual climate has worsened. Jezebel is massacring the prophets of God. Verse 6, things were so desperate. Again, this is just how desperate things have come in day-to-day life in the land. Even King Ahab is out looking for grass for his livestock. Can you imagine the king? He doesn't have enough servants around anymore in order to command servants to go look for grass for his livestock. He's having to go out look for grass for his own livestock. That's how bad things have got. Verse 10, Ahab had initiated a manhunt for Elijah. He's sending people out through all the neighboring nations, and everybody is out on the lookout for Elijah to bring him back to the land. And so in verse 1, God told Elijah to go and go back to the land, present himself before Ahab. Don't lose sight of the faith that is required for him to do that. Ahab is hunting for Elijah, hunting. And Jezebel wants him dead because he's a prophet of God. And yet he arises and he goes back to Israel and he goes to present himself to Ahab. No questions, no arguments at all. It reminds me of the faith of Abraham when God tells him to go and to serve him on a mountain and make sacrifice. And the sacrifice is Isaac, his son. Abraham didn't question it. He went and obeyed what God said do. And so Elijah comes back to the land even as God commands him to. And when he appears before Ahab, the king's disdain is evident. As soon as the king sees him, "Is that you, O troubler of Israel?" Ahab blames Elijah for the mess that the nation is in, because he's the one who said it wouldn't rain. Now, rain is the least of the problems in Israel, but that is how it's being felt by the people. Is that there's no rain, therefore there's no produce, and therefore there's a famine on the land. It's easy and it's common for people to blame others for the hardships and difficulties that they have caused themselves. And that's what's happened here. Ahab is the cause of this, not Elijah. And so Elijah's not afraid to call Ahab out on that. "I've not troubled Israel, but you and your father's house have, in that you have forsaken the commandments of the Lord and have followed the Baals." Let me tell you why Israel is in such a bad place. It's because of you, and because you have turned your back on the Lord. You're not serving God as you ought to. And therefore, because there is not faithful leadership, the nation has suffered greatly, and you continue to lead them in the wrong way. By way of application in this, you and I are not prophets of God as Elijah, and our experience is going to be somewhat different than Elijah's experience in various things that happen. But you and I will experience that, where folks might project their guilt or misdirect blame or condemn us for what they themselves practice. That's not a new thing, right? That happens a lot. Those who accuse Christians of hatred often display the very intolerance that they condemn. They say that we're intolerant somehow, and yet they display their disdain for us, which is intolerance. They judge harshly while excusing their own personal or ideological sins. That is who Ahab was. And unfortunately, we'll run into folks who are like that even today. Jesus cautioned his disciples that faithfulness to the Lord would make them unpopular with people. John 15 at verse 18 beginning, "If the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world, they would love its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they keep my words, they will keep yours also." The same is true today, and the same was true back in Elijah's day. In fact, Jesus in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 11 and 12, he referenced the prophets of old who also suffered because of their stand for the things of God. And so you and I need to continue to walk in faithfulness and integrity despite the accusations or mistreatments that might come our way. We see Elijah as an example of doing so. Well, Elijah told Ahab, "Go ahead and gather the people. Gather all Israel, gather the false prophets, bring them in too, And Ahab did so, which I find interesting that, everything that Elijah tells Ahab to do, Ahab does it. I get the impression that as much as Ahab does not like Elijah, he realizes he needs Elijah. Elijah is the one who brought this curse upon the land in the first place, who proclaimed that there would be no rain, and then left. And I'm sure that he has had the prophets of Baal doing whatever the prophets of Baal can do in order to bring about rain. And it's been 3.5 years since it rained, since Elijah said it wouldn't. And so for that reason, it would seem that Ahab is willing to listen to Elijah and do what he says, rather than command him to be killed. When the people gather, and it says all Israel, and so, basically everybody has been brought together to this place. Elijah confronts them. Now, he's already confronted Ahab. Ahab, you're the problem. But Ahab's not the only problem. The people are following Ahab. Rather than following the Lord, they should know to follow the Lord. And so his question to the populace at large is this: how long will you falter between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, follow him. He called out their lack of commitment and their willingness to compromise their faith. You are the people of Israel. You're the people of God. You're supposed to worship the Lord. And so if Jehovah is God, follow him. Or if Baal is God, follow him. But don't fall between the two options and try and keep your foot on both sides of the fence. Elijah's statement leaves no room for another option, or no room for both. It is an either-or scenario that he presents to them. Now, Baal worship, understand, is polytheistic at its very core. There are actually multiple Baals. And not only do they worship Baal, but as we've seen in the text, they also have the prophets of Asherah. And so they've got Asherah. Then they have a bunch of other gods that would be available as well. And so Baal has no problem with worshiping a bunch of gods. And Baal would be okay. You want to worship Jehovah too? Go ahead, worship Jehovah too. Incidentally, Baal doesn't exist to care one way or the other. But if Jehovah is God, there is no room for another. There is no room for Baal if Jehovah is God. You must reject Baal, because Jehovah is the one true God. And if you count Baal to be a god, and you can put a small letter G in front of that if you want to, if you count Baal to be a god, then by default you have chosen to reject Jehovah. Even if you bow before him in prayer, even if you make sacrifice to him, if you accept Baal, you have rejected Jehovah. That is the nature of the challenge he lays before them. And so their answer is disappointing. They don't answer anything. They stay quiet. They're not sure what to do with that. His challenge to them reminds me a lot of Joshua. You remember Joshua in the last speech that he gave before the people. He said, if it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your fathers, or which your fathers served on the other side of the river, the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. He gives them options, but if you choose the Lord, he's the only option. If you choose the gods, plural, that are on the other side of the river, you can have multiple gods if you want to. You can choose the gods of the Amorites in this land. You can have multiple gods if you want to. But if you choose the Lord, that's exclusive. You can only serve the Lord. The immediate reaction of the people in Joshua's day was wonderful. Far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. Further, they declare this, They said, the Lord our God we will serve, and his voice we will obey. Further, they say this. It says this of them: Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had known the works of the Lord which he had done for Israel. Back in Joshua's time, when Joshua gave them this challenge, they answered correctly. Yes, we will serve the Lord. How dare we do anything but? And they did. Verse 31 confirms they did do this. They served the Lord and continued to serve him even beyond the days of Joshua. Come back to Elijah's time. There was no far be it from us. There was no the Lord we will serve. There was no his voice we will obey. There was just simply silence. The people answered him not a word. Well, friends, God doesn't want us to give half-hearted service. He actually wants us to proclaim that we are going to serve him and then follow through with that service. Jesus warned we can't serve God and live in the world at the same time and serve the world. In Matthew 6, verse 24, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate one and love the other, or he'll be loyal to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon, or God and riches, or we might extend that even just God and the things of the world. We can't have our heart mixed that way. Half-hearted service to the Lord is no service at all. And so we need to act to affirm our faith in him and then act upon it as his people. So verse 22. In verse 22, Elijah makes the statement, I alone am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. So he's outnumbered. Now remember, there's also 400 prophets of Asherah. I don't know that they actually showed up at Mount Carmel. There's no indication that they did. He invited them, but when he words it here, it's that there's 450 there. He doesn't say 850. So I'll take him at his word that there were 450. Maybe the prophets of Asher are in the crowd somewhere. I don't know. But he is outnumbered 450 to 1. Jezebel has been killing off the prophets of God, and so the collection of the prophets of God that might have been there to support him just simply are not. They have been killed off. Now, here's the thing. They're not all gone, but Elijah doesn't know. He perceives that he is the only one at this point. At least he's the only one who's standing up and speaking out. Well, he's not the first servant of God to stand alone or nearly alone. That actually happens quite a bit. That was Noah's experience, right? He's surrounded by people who do not love God, do not love the ways of God, and Noah is proclaiming truth and righteousness, and he was doing so by himself. Joshua and Caleb, they weren't alone, they were together, but it was just the two of them against the other 10 spies who came out of the land, and by default against the nation, because the nation followed the 10 rather than the 2. Gideon wasn't alone. He had 300 men, but they were fighting against a large group that was just so numerous that you couldn't count it. And so this is not something that is new for God's people to be in the minority. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Abraham, continue on, right? It's the common experience of the people of God. And what we need to understand is that truth is not determined by majority. If that were the case, then obviously Baal is true, because there's 450 prophets of Baal, there's one prophet of God, therefore Baal is right. But truth is not determined by majority. Verse 23 and 24, he lays out, here's what we're going to do. Let them give us 2 bulls. Let them choose one bull for themselves. And then nice of him, he lets them choose which bull they want. You go ahead and choose the better bull if you want it. Cut it in pieces, lay it on the wood, and put no fire under it. And I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood, but put no fire under it. Then you call on the name of your gods, and I will call on the name of the Lord, and the God who answers by fire, he is God. Seems pretty reasonable. Let's find out who serves a God who can do something. And in fact, the people thought that this was good. The people of Israel, it is well spoken. Okay, we're willing. We didn't say anything before when you challenged us, but okay, we're willing to see the evidence. Understand this, it's not merely a contest between Elijah and the prophets of Baal. In fact, they are the workmen in this contest. This is a divine showdown. This is between Jehovah God and Baal. They are the combatants here. The people of Israel think it's a good test. We're not told whether the prophets of Baal agreed whether it was a good test or not. Of course, it'd be sort of hard to back down from that, right? Here's this one lonely prophet who is supposedly serving a God who is not really, who cares, right? Because Israel didn't care much about God at this point. And so it would seem like backing down from this, not a good idea. And yet, had they ever seen Baal do anything? Have they ever seen Baal do or say anything? They served this Baal, and they convinced themselves that Baal is great, but now Baal's being put to the test. Verse 25 through verse 29, the prophets of Baal prepare their bull, and they start petitioning Baal. Verse 26, they called in the name of Baal from morning even till noon. I don't know what time in the morning they started, but they've spent their whole morning here calling on Baal, and there is no answer, no voice, no rumblings, and certainly no fire. And so Elijah, at lunch break, takes the opportunity to mock them. Cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he's meditating, or he's busy, or he's on a journey, or perhaps he's sleeping and must be awakened. Verse 27. You just got to cry louder. Baal's hard of hearing, maybe. I don't know why Baal's not listening to you, but go ahead and cry louder. So they do. They cry even louder in the afternoon, and they start cutting themselves in the afternoon. And it says that they were cutting themselves to the point where blood was gushing out of them. That's some serious commitment to a God who's not answering. Still nothing. Later on in the afternoon, they start prophesying, but still no voice, no response, no fire. Well, that's the way of false gods. A few of the prophets talk about them as, they're that tree that's cut down, half of it becomes firewood and the other half is turned into a god. And they've got arms, but they can't carry anything, and they've got legs, but they can't walk anywhere, and they've got a mouth, but they can't speak, and they've got ears, but they can't hear, they've got eyes, but they can't see. These false gods don't do anything. In fact, remember, when the ark of God was put in beside one of the Philistine gods, all he could do was fall over. And they lifted him up and perched him back up, and then he fell over the next day as well, and his head fell off. That's the nature of false gods. They say nothing and they do nothing. Now, today's false gods still promise much but deliver nothing. And today's false gods, the modern Baals, they're not like their false gods. Today's false gods, today's modern Baals are things like materialism and pleasure and pride and prestige and those kinds of things. Whatever idol we set up for ourselves in the place of God will eventually be tested, and inevitably it will fail because it is not worthy of our worship and attention. Because in them we find false security. In them we find temporary gratification. In them we find pseudo-satisfaction. Verse 30 on through 35. The time of the evening sacrifice approached. Elijah's paying attention to the sun and where the sun is. And all right, it's about time for the evening sacrifice. Down in Jerusalem, they are participating in the evening sacrifice. But not up here. We don't worship Jehovah up here. But Elijah's paying attention. He sees it's almost time for the evening sacrifice, and so he begins to take action. The prophets of Baal, they had all day. He gave them the bulk of the time, and nothing happened. Baal failed. Now it's Elijah's turn. And so he calls the people to come near. And I don't know if they started to disperse because nothing was happening or if they were at a distance, but he wants them to, come on, get in close here. Come near. Be a part of this. What he does is he repairs the altar of the Lord that was broken down. I don't know how long it had been broken down. I suspect for a good long time. He repairs the broken down altar. He uses 12 stones to do so, representative of the 12 tribes of Israel. He makes a trench around the altar. We'll get back to why there's a trench there, but there's a purpose. Makes a trench around the altar. And at this point, Elijah then sets the wood on the altar. He cuts the bull and lays it out on the wood. Everything is ready to go ahead and petition God and see if Jehovah will answer. Then what he does next likely shocks everybody. In fact, I imagine that it angered most people. Verse 33, he said, "Fill 4 water pots with water and pour it on the burnt sacrifice and on the wood." Water. Now, a couple things. First of all, they're on the top of Mount Carmel. There's no water up there. So they're going to have to carry this water from wherever they're storing the water, or from any source of water, if there's a river that's still flowing somewhere. Remember the brook that he was at, it's dried up, and several brooks have likely dried up. Go find water wherever you've got water. Bring 4 water pots of water, and we're going to pour that on the burnt offering. It is a drought. Water is scarce. They do it. They go find the water and they bring it back. They pour it on the burnt offering and the sacrifice. Verse 34, do it again. Do it a second time. And so they go and find 4 more pots of water. This is precious stuff. And they pour that out on the altar. Latter part of verse 34, do it a third time. So we have had 12 water pots poured on top of this altar. And then in addition to that, the water runs down over the altar and so forth. And then he also fills the trench around it with water. So there's additional water that's used for that. Have you ever wondered how much water is he using in this whole endeavor? In a time when water is very precious? Elijah poured roughly 40 to 60 gallons of water over this altar. So that would work out to, I don't have one with me, but there's one on the screen. There's a 500 ml bottle of water. It's a really big one. It's on the screen, right? That would amount to 300 to 480 bottles of water. What? Or if you're buying them in cases, the 24-pack cases, depending on exactly how much or how big their water pots are, that's really the question, is how big are their water pots. But it would be 12 to 20 cases of water, all just poured out onto this altar. It's not like you can reuse it, right? It's getting soaked up by the land pretty quick after it's been on there, and the sacrifice is soaked and so forth. May I suggest to you that if this does not work, this is the last thing Elijah ever does. They are going to kill him. If this does not work, he's dead. Well, here's the thing for you and I by way of application. True worship of God is not about spectacle. That's what was done all through the day. That's what the prophets of Baal were doing. That was all spectacle and nothing happened. True worship demands and begins at restoration. That's why he rebuilds the altar. But not only is it about restoration, it's also about sacrifice. And so there's a huge sacrifice, and he has actually called the people of Israel into the sacrifice here. Water is precious. And he has called upon them to make that sacrifice. If our relationship with God is broken, we need to rebuild it like he rebuilt the altar. We need to rebuild the altar of our life, if you will. We need to be sure that we return to God and with penitence and with a focus to serve God, so that he will be glorified. Elijah is calling them into that place where their hearts are going to be stirred by what they are about to see. Verse 36. Verse 36 and 37, it came to pass at the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice. Again, Elijah's paying attention to the clock. He knows what time it is. It's time for the sacrifice. It came to pass at the time of the evening sacrifice Elijah the prophet came near and said, Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Hear me, O Lord, hear me, that this people may know that you are the Lord God, and that you have turned their hearts back to you again. Remember the question. How long will you falter between two options? If the Lord is God, serve him. If Baal is God, serve him. And they answered nothing. In their presence, he prays and he says, Lord, this people need to know that you are God and that you're turning them back to you. Elijah finishes his prayer, and immediately, verse 38, then fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt sacrifice and the wood and the stone and the dust, and it licked up the water that was in the trench. So at one moment, there is this altar that's there, and there's wood on it, no fire, and there's a sacrifice on top. Everything is soaked. There's a trench around there that's got water in it. Fire comes down from heaven. No more sacrifice, no more wood, no more altar, and no more water. There's just a flat spot there now. Who's God? Baal didn't do anything. He didn't even say anything. He didn't say, hey, I'm busy today, fellas, come back tomorrow. None of that. Put yourself in the position of these people. You've seen the prophets of Baal pray and dance and shout and cut themselves all day long. These are the prophets that you have relied upon to lead you spiritually. Baal did nothing. No voice, no revelation, no fire. The bull is still there on the altar, likely covered with flies at this point. And then you watch Elijah in anger at Elijah as he rebuilds this altar that was left unused and unkept, and he uses gallons upon gallons of water, wasting precious water, soaking it into the sacrifice and the altar and the ground that is around. And then after a simple prayer, for you. Understand that this was a prayer for them. After Elijah prays for you, fire comes from heaven, devouring everything. What do? Earlier, you just stayed quiet. There was no answer. At this point, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. That is the answer. In Hebrew, what they're shouting is, Elohim Yahweh, Elohim Yahweh. Incidentally, Elijah's name is actually a shortened form of Elohim Yahweh. Elijah, Elohim, Yahweh, Jah, Elijah. They're not chanting Elijah's name. But Elijah was called for this purpose, so that they would come to the conclusion, the Lord, Jehovah, he is God. This fire from heaven, it was not a coincidence. It was revelation. It wasn't written revelation. That's typically how we use that word. But it was God answering a prayer. It was God calling upon his people. It was God stirring that response in his people, that the Lord is God. Now, you and I, we're unlikely to see fire coming out of heaven, consuming a sacrifice, wood, altar, etc. I don't think we're going to see that. But we are the recipients of God's revelation. We have the revealed word before us. And we can come to the same conclusion as you and I are students of the scriptures. We can come to the same conclusion that they did. The Lord, he is God. The evidence is ample. But here's the thing. The conviction of his identity is pointless without the resolution to serve him. We can proclaim all day long, the Lord, he is God, and do nothing about that, and it's just words. For the people of Israel, that then involved removing the prophets of Baal from their midst. Verse 40, Elijah said to them, seize the prophets of Baal, do not let them escape. So they seized them. Elijah can't do this by himself. He already told us it's 450 to 1. He can't do this. The people have to act. And so when it says, so they seized them, it is the people of Israel seized the prophets of Baal, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and executed them there. 450 prophets of Baal are no more in the land of Israel that day. Understand, this is not personal vengeance. This isn't because Elijah doesn't like these men. This isn't because they made fun of Elijah and because they took over things. This is a matter of divine justice. They had violated the law of God. They had led the people of God into idolatry, and they are now suffering the result of that. And so, at least for the moment, the influence of the pagan prophets was removed from Israel. Verse 41, Elijah told Ahab the rain was on its way. I'm not going to focus on the latter verses a whole lot, but they're looking out into the sky and it's all blue. Looking out into the sky, it's still all blue. They keep on looking out into the sky, it's all blue. Eventually, there's a tiny little cloud out there. And Elijah says, you better hurry up and go. It's going to rain. That's faith. When you see just the tiniest of little clouds on the horizon, it's going to rain. Elijah told Ahab it's going to rain. Ahab's heart in all of this is not turned back to God. The heart of the people was, at least for the present. And that was the purpose of the drought, and the purpose of the famine was to turn Israel back to the Lord God. And so the chapter ends with the sky eventually becoming black, and the clouds and the wind and heavy rain start to fall at the end of all this. But remember Elijah's question. How long will you falter between two opinions? Jesus made a similar call to faithful service in Matthew chapter 16. He didn't use the same words, but the idea is still the same. If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? There's still two options. The two options that Elijah saw in front of his people is serve the Lord or serve Baal. Choose one of them. One's the bad choice. Don't do that one. Jesus says you can either serve the Lord or you can serve yourself. One of those is a bad choice. And the way that Jesus portrays it is if you gain the whole world, you choose the path of serving yourself. If you gain the whole world, is it worth it? If you lose your soul. And so we are faced with the same choice that the people so many years ago were faced with. Don't be stuck. Don't falter between two opinions. Make the choice for the Lord. It's important that we put the Lord first in life, that we give our life to him, because he alone can save. Remember over in Romans chapter 12 and at verse 1, it identifies you and I as a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God, which is our reasonable service. Elijah brought the sacrifice, and it was holy and acceptable before God, and he received it. Today, you're the sacrifice. Let us present ourselves as a holy sacrifice that is acceptable to God. If our life is in a mess and we need to rebuild the altar, let's do so. It's okay to rebuild altars. That's better than leaving them torn down. That is the altar of our life in service to God. We live in an age that is riddled with compromise, just as Elijah did. The compromises are different, and yet at the same time, they are very much similar. We need to stand firm in faith. So if we can help you in some way to do so, if we can be an encouragement to you, if we can be praying for you, opening our Bibles and studying together, we want to do that. If we can help by way of obedience to the gospel, we certainly want to do that. God wants us to serve him, and he wants us to do so for his glory, but for our eternal benefit. So if we can help you in your walk of faith, let us know as we stand together and as we sing.